everybody. Jeff Jones here. Welcome to the weekly Chase Oaks Church podcast. Before we dive in, I want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and download the Chase Oaks Church app. The app is the best place to catch up on messages, engage with our community, and stay in the loop with everything going on around here. Most importantly, my hope is that today's message inspires you to take your next step in your faith journey. Here we go.
Well, hello there, Chase Oaks. It's good to be with you. Thank you. Man, you guys are always so kind. It's great to be with you. As your host mentioned, we are in the middle of a series called Fruitful, where we've been looking at what a life connected to God really looks like. And it's a series we've based around a verse in the Bible. It comes from the book of Galatians, where it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, I've always found it interesting, and I'm a bit of a geek, so maybe this is just me. I've always found it interesting that with this verse that there are multiple characteristics that are mentioned, but it's all labeled as one fruit. What's interesting to me is that a few verses before this, the Apostle Paul, he's the one that wrote this passage, he will talk about the things that happen in our life when we live disconnected from God, when we live kind of powered by our own selves. And the way that he lists out some of those characteristics, they would be things like envy or jealousy or rage or dissension. But when he categorizes those things, he categorizes them as works or acts of the flesh. And he uses the plural for it, as opposed to the fruit of the Spirit, which is singular. Again, this might be a little grammatical. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But what I think Paul is trying to convey here, and what we've been talking about in this series, is that when you and I live powered by our own desires, it will lead to many fractured expressions of brokenness. That we will start to almost pull apart, or we'll see how our lives or our culture's lives will be torn apart, kind of scattered into multiple pieces. And yet when you and I are powered by the Holy Spirit, what God will do in us is actually he will pull us together, making us one complete life, fully human, the whole men and women that we were always designed to be, but will not experience apart from him. And that's especially true for the characteristic that we're talking about today, which is kindness. And I think as you and I are thinking about our life, what I've so appreciated about this series is that, we live in a world right now that can feel so fractured and being pulled apart. Maybe as you think about your own life right now, you're saying, hey, you know what? Life feels kind of torn apart right now. And I'm just so glad that we've had this series where we've explored how God wants to restore wholeness to the brokenness that we often experience. And so as we dive into kindness, as a child of the 1980s, that's when I grew up. That'll date me a little bit. When I think of kindness, the first thing that pops to mind is this man, Mr. Rogers. Isn't he so sweet? He's got that nice cardigan and everything like that. So whether you're familiar or not, maybe you didn't grow up with him like I did, but even if you didn't, he's had a bit of a resurgence lately. He had a recent documentary that was about his life. Tom Hanks starred as him in a recent movie. My kids have grown up actually being inspired by his content. They may not even know this, but the content from Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is a cartoon for preschoolers, was designed around Mr. Rogers' content for a whole new generation. But if you're not familiar with Mr. Rogers, the way that he would kind of open up every show, because he was a show that was designed for preschoolers and kids to learn about life and how to navigate emotions and how to handle a crazy world, is that Mr. Rogers would come into his TV set kind of home, and he'd open the door, he'd be singing a song. Does anybody know what song he'd be singing? Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, that's right. And then, he would say, hello, neighbor, in that sweet, kind voice. And then he would go from work mode to home mode. And for him, he'd come in with a full suit on, and he would really let his hair down because he would just take off the suit jacket and put on that red cardigan, really crazy stuff like that. And then after that, he would, he'd feed his fish and he'd talk about emotions. He was a talented singer, but he was also a talented puppeteer as well. So he had a whole, cast of puppets in what he called the land of make-believe. And so, he would teach about life and all that sort of thing. And in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, you couldn't help but feel way better about yourself. It's like the world was just so great, everything was so optimistic. But you and I, and this isn't really much of a news flash, you and I don't live in the land of make-believe. We live in the real world, and in the real world, kindness can be a lot more complicated. I learned this even as I was growing up, and I was watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and yet in elementary school, there was a bully that started picking on me, and I figured out pretty fast that showing up with a cardigan and puppets and singing would not have helped that situation very much. But you and I are navigating different situations in our life too. I mean, as you try to figure out what does kindness look like as you're navigating tough family situations and boundaries or workplace environment stuff that you're trying to deal with, or even around stuff in our world that we're passionate about, that we desperately want to see change, whether it's in our neighborhood or in our nation or in our world, it can be hard to know exactly what it looks like to fit kindness into that equation. In fact, right now, it's kind of common for kindness to be more up for debate than ever before. Like, I've heard from many people, many of them good-natured, well-meaning Christians even, who would say that kindness is nice, but actually a little problematic. That it can actually be taken advantage of, or seen as being weak, or seen as agreeing with someone that we maybe disagree with, or seen as kind of giving in. And that what our world needs now in that mindset is not necessarily kindness. I mean, that's nice. But actually what it needs is for people to stand firm more than ever before, even getting a little harsh. I think all of this stems maybe from an underdeveloped definition of kindness, and we're going to get into that today, because I know for some of us, even as I was flashing up Mr. Rogers, and you think about your workplace environment or even your personality, you're like, hey, cardigans and puppets and songs, I mean, that's okay. That's not really who I want to be, not really how I'm designed to be. I don't necessarily think that's going to work. But I don't think that that's what kindness is. That kindness is not the same as niceness or politeness. Those are actually different things. And that there is a difference between, or sometimes we would say that, we would say being strong and being kind are on polar opposites. And I think they're related in a profound way. And this is important for us to talk about today because we live in an increasingly unkind world. Like, I want you to think about it even for your personal world. Like, think about last week. When was the last time somebody was mean to you in the week? My hunch is that it won't take you too long to think of one thing or probably think of multiple things. Kindness too, like when we have a moment where someone's mean or unkind to us, those things stick with us too. Those are hard to brush off and hard to dismiss because that's the power of unkindness. And the challenge with it too is that unkindness can actually be contagious. And Christians, we're not immune from this either. That it starts to spread, and maybe you've experienced this where you've seen it spread through a home or your workplace or a neighborhood or a nation or even our world. And I think it's spreading more and more. And so for you and I today, what does it look like for us to not get pulled into the fray of a divisive culture? Even worse, to not be the ones that are actively pulling apart culture, but instead to join God in the crucial work that he's doing, which involves kindness, where he's restoring wholeness to brokenness. And so the good news is that Jesus talks about this. He addressed the challenge of being kind in an unkind world. And he did this in a story. It's a famous story in Luke chapter 10. It starts this way. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. This expert, don't think of him, he's a lawyer, but he's not really like our kind of lawyer. He's not like civil law or legal issues or courts or anything like this. This was a guy that was an expert in the I can't speak tonight. I got to work on that. The Judaism, well, there we go. The Jewish scripture. We're going to get there, aren't we, Chase Oaks? We're going to get there. The Jewish scripture. He was an expert in the Jewish scripture, and so he knew the Old Testament inside and out. And so he stood up to test Jesus because Jesus was a strange rabbi who started talking about all sorts of things. And so he said, "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" That basically, Jesus had been going around in his ministry talking about this everlasting kingdom that Jesus had come to usher in. And so this guy's like, hey, I hear you talking about this kingdom. It's a little strange. I also know in the Old Testament, it talks about everlasting life. What does it take to get there? And so Jesus replies, well, what is written in the law? Basically, hey, you're a lawyer. You're an expert. What do you think? And so the expert answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This expert, he cites what is called the Shema, which means literally listen. It comes from a famous passage in Deuteronomy 6:5. Where it talks about loving the Lord your God with all of your being, with all of who you are. And a good Jewish person at that time would have recited this saying every day. It was kind of the thing that they all knew. So that would have been an immediate answer that would have popped up for any of them as they talked about, well, what does it look like to follow God? But the lawyer shows some nuance. He adds in something that was not common, actually showed something that he knew what he was talking about, because he adds to it a portion from Leviticus 19:18, which talks about loving your neighbor or having great love for one's neighbor. And so this was a unique add-on, which caused Jesus, to raise his eyebrows and to say, well, that's amazing. He said, you have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. Now, just stop for a moment, because, if you've read any of the gospel accounts, it was unusual for anybody to have been told by Jesus that they answered any of his questions correctly. Like, imagine if you were in class, back in the day, and you got called up and you had to solve that tough math, assignment, the geometry equation, the proof, or whatever it is. And the teacher, you got it right in front of all your classmates, that special smile that would come on your face, the little hitch in your giddy up, that's what's up, as you're going back to class. Well, this is what this lawyer must have been feeling, because this never happened in all of these accounts. And so Jesus you've answered correctly. And the reason why Jesus was impressed, the reason why he affirmed this, is that what this lawyer was saying correctly is that spirituality had both a vertical component to it, but also a horizontal component to it as well. And that in many ways, the horizontal, the way that you and I love and relate to people, demonstrates the vertical, the way that you and I love God. Think about it for a moment. It is so hard if you were to try to quantify if somebody loves God. How would you do it? You could start to say, well, okay, they pray or they go to church, but the more you think about it, you're like, is that really love, or is that just, am I just checking off things? It's hard to know because it's so intangible. But what Jesus is affirming here, and what the lawyer's answer said, is that when you are loving other people, that's where the rubber meets the road, where you actually can find out what they love and how they work. It's a whole other game when you are trying to love a friend or a coworker or a neighbor or that person on your street or your in-laws or anything like that. That is more measurable. And so Jesus affirms this answer, and he looks at the lawyer and he says, okay, so go and do that. Basically, go and love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength, and love your neighbor unconditionally, completely. Just go and do that. Which for any person, you would look at that and say, well, who can do that? That's crazy. You can start to think of instances where it's okay, I fall short there and there, which would cause most of us to have some humility and say, well, Jesus, who could do that? And I think he would have responded in this moment exactly. That you need grace, that you need mercy. But that's not how our lawyer friend responds. Instead, he does something else. But he, the expert, wanted to justify himself. I love that the narrator in this story, that there is actually a narrator that can tell us what people are thinking. It made me think of how weird it would be if there was a narrator on my life. Have you ever thought about that? If there was a narrator that was okay, then Eric, seeking to justify himself, cut off that driver on the street. Eric, seeking to justify himself, told that joke at that moment. I wear a smartwatch, and it pings me, with kind of useless things at times, where it's like you need to stand or you need to move a little bit, which is just kind of annoying with that. I wondered though, what if there was like a ping that would pop up when there was a justification alert? So it's like it'd be pinging a lot for all of us, because that's what it means to be human. But it's one thing for us to try to justify ourselves in front of other people. It's a whole other thing to try to justify ourselves in front of God. And this guy didn't necessarily even know that that's what he was doing, but this is what he was doing. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" That what this lawyer is trying to do is define the scope of neighbor. And back in that time, they were aware of Leviticus 19:18. They knew that it was called upon them. It was a command for them to love their neighbor. But back then, they defined this very ethnocentrically. And there's a good reason for why they would do this. If you put yourselves in their shoes, in the context of when this was written, the Jewish people were being occupied by a foreign power, a big one, the Roman Empire. There was lots of strange customs that were coming over them, lots of different people. And so when they thought about this command, how they interpreted it was that, we need to really take care of our people. Because if not, there's going to be all these outside forces that are going to try to change us and try to move it and just do all sorts of things, try to compromise us. And so loving your neighbor is loving good Jewish people that are in your life. And even within that, there was at this time some different wisdom literature for the Jewish people that would talk about how you could actually become a non-neighbor. Like if you were sinning or you weren't acting all that great, that you could actually move yourself out of the category of neighbor and not even need to be following this command. So the question that this lawyer is asking is a legitimate one. He's trying to say, hey, okay, Jesus, I get that I'm supposed to do that. So who of my Judean people, my brothers and sisters that are around my everyday life, who is it that exactly that I need to love in order to meet the demands of this command? And it's at this point that Jesus tells one of his most famous stories. In fact, I think most of us in this room, whether you have a church background or not, you have heard of this story before. And I don't want that to pass over us, that Jesus was a master storyteller. And part of the reason why he was so good at it was that he would know how to poke. And he would make it controversial. He would make it even a little offensive. And that's exactly what he does here with this story. Continuing on, in reply, this is the story. Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, where he was attacked by robbers." And Jerusalem is up on a hill. If you've ever visited, everything needs to go up to Jerusalem. So if you travel away, you're going downhill. And so the road from Jerusalem to Jericho was about 17 miles, and it was a notoriously dangerous journey. It was full of lots of weird, rugged terrain. There were caves all over the place where you could get jumped at any time. The audience that was hearing this would have been nodding along. They're like, "Oh yeah, we've heard of that road. That's exactly what we would expect to happen." And that is what happened to this particular traveler. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by the other side as well. That the first two people in this story were seen as the uber religious. Like these were the ones, like both the priest and the Levite at this time, they worked in the temple in Jerusalem. It was thought to be the holiest place, the place that God was most at work in the world at that time. And so these two guys, they were part of making religious services happen. And so the point being that if anybody loved God, it would be these two guys here. And yet what Jesus wants us to connect the dots with in this moment is that because they passed by this guy on the road, they actually didn't love God with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their strength, and all their might, because they whiffed on loving the person that was in their path. And that would have been super controversial. You'd be like, well, these are the religious guys. Of course, hope has arrived that these guys are here. And these guys, they passed by most likely because they were trying to still go about their religious duties. That if they maybe touched a dead body, it would make them unclean or make it hard for them to do what they thought they were supposed to be doing in the temple. But because they whiffed on it, they missed out on what they were supposed to do. And then I think in this moment, Jesus would pause for dramatic effect. And he would say, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he took the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, that would be about $200 to $300 in today's wages, and gave them to the innkeeper. He goes above and beyond. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. Now, the shock value on this gets lost on us. I mean, again, this shows the power of this story, because when you and I hear the story, and even the phrase Good Samaritan, perhaps you've heard that phrase before. There's a lot of charities today that are named, Samaritan's Purse or Good Samaritan. We talk about it, it's like, oh, that person is such a good Samaritan. That it gets lost on us that back then, in this context, there was no such thing as a Good Samaritan. That there was so much religious and racial tension between the Jewish people and the Samaritan people. They had different ideas of what the temple should look like. They got angry about whose parents were whose parents and who had married whom and all this. There was so much tension that was wrapped up in here that in their minds, like, there is no such thing as a Good Samaritan. So for you and I, we have to introduce some shock value in our own life. And I don't know what that would be for you, but I'm gonna ask you to. Just think in your mind, like, did you ever grow up thinking, okay, or maybe somebody in your life that said to you, there's no such thing as a good blank. It could be, there's no such thing as a good Aggie or a good Longhorn or a good Crimson Tide fan. Jeff's not here, so it doesn't matter. Or there's no such thing as a good Republican or Democrat or a person from this part of the country or that part of the country or another country. I don't know what it is for you, but make it shocking. Like, put in there the idea, the least possible person that you would think that could possibly be the hero in the story. Because that's the controversial thing that's in here, is that it would have been shocking enough for this audience if Jesus had made the victim a Samaritan. Like, there would have been some legitimate tension in that room of like, okay, the priest and the Levite and maybe even just a third passerby, like a lay, Jewish person. There would be some tension about whether or not they would have stopped to have helped a Samaritan, let alone the fact that Jesus makes the Samaritan the one that actually goes above and beyond, pays for every expense from start to finish, and goes out of his way and stops in the middle of a dangerous road to help this complete stranger. It was shocking. And what Jesus does with that shock factor is he changes the premise of the lawyer's question. That the lawyer was asking, okay, Jesus, help me define the scope of who my neighbor is. And what Jesus does in this moment is he flips the script and says, the real question is, who was acting like a neighbor in this moment? That's the question he asks. He says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. I don't know if you picked up on that the lawyer couldn't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. He's like, are you gonna make me say it? It's the guy, who did the thing by the side of the road. He's the one. It was the one who saw a need in front of him, and more than seeing a need in front of him, he saw a person in front of him, put in his path, and who was moved enough to actually do something about it. In other words, it was the person who was kind. And I think the Good Samaritan story, I think it helps us have this definition of kindness, because kindness requires, I think, 2 key ingredients in it. If you don't have one of these ingredients, then you have something that's fine, that's good, but you don't have kindness. Because true kindness requires a soft heart added with tender action. Like, let's take a soft heart for the start of this. That what separated the Samaritan from the other two guys was that, they all saw the same thing. But it was the Samaritan that actually had his heart open to see what was going on and was moved by compassion in that moment. The Greek word, the New Testament was written mostly in Greek. And so the Greek word, it's a great word that they use for take pity or have compassion. It's splachna. That's a great word, splachna. And splachna means literally to be moved in your belly, to be moved deep down in your guts. Because in the ancient world, the seat of emotion was found in your guts. Now, in our world, in the modern world, having a movement of the bowels means something totally different. And so I hope it's okay in this moment. I decided to change it from guts. Having like soft guts just sounded like a medical problem and a little distracting. So we're gonna go with a soft heart. And in our culture, heart is where the seat of the emotion is. And so what does it mean to have a soft heart? It means that in that moment that, it's the opposite of a hard heart. If you think of a hard heart, it'd be something that's impenetrable, that can't be moved by anything. It's like it's made up its mind and it's stubborn and it's all that. Whereas a soft heart is open to new data. It's open to new concepts and it feels and it can experience and understand the pain that might be in the space that they're in. It sees people as fully people. And having a soft heart, it doesn't mean, again, even when you think of your families or you think of neighborhoods or workplaces, it doesn't mean somebody that has a boundaryless life or doesn't have any beliefs or passions or positions about anything. Having a soft heart, though, means that with all of those differences, that we never cease to see other people as fully human people who have emotions that we can empathize with and have compassion. And so the Good Samaritan had a soft heart, but he didn't just stop with a soft heart. Because if you stop with just that, then what you have is you have pity, you have nice thoughts, you have sending good hopes and dreams to people. But if we want to move forward past that, it actually takes something else, and that means having tender action. And that's what the Good Samaritan had. What's tender action? Tender action is not the same as being weak. I mean, we tend to hear the word tender and weak, and maybe it sounds the same, but they're actually two totally different things. Because if I am tender, it means that I actually understand that in some area I have a significant amount of strength, and that I am choosing how I want to use that strength or not use that strength, but I'm aware of what the strength is that I have, and that I'm choosing in many ways to regulate it, or in even better, to leverage it. Like I think about this, I have 2 elementary school-aged boys who I like to roughhouse with. But having tender action means that I know in that moment I'm physically stronger than both of them. And so being tender means not that I'm not stronger than them, it's that I'm regulating my strength as I interact with them. But again, even better, it's when we actually leverage our strength for someone else. That's when it gets really tender. And power and strength come in lots of different forms. Like in the case of the Good Samaritan, he had strength that was financial. And so tender action for him meant that he was moved in that moment to then leverage the financial strength that he had been given for the benefit of someone else. Or sometimes strength can mean positions and of authority or privilege that we have in our life. And having tender action means being aware that I have this position and deciding not to use it to overlord it over somebody else, but instead to say, hey, I actually can leverage this on the benefit of somebody else. Even when we have those positions of authority in how we use things like our words. Words carry so much weight. And so again, having tender action with our words means I use a tone that maybe understands the moment that I'm in with someone. Or even better, I can leverage my words to open up doors for people, to uplift them, to encourage them, that's strength that we have. And so if that's our definition of kindness, that kindness is having both a soft heart, adding to it tender action, then I want to go back to Mr. Rogers at the beginning. Because I kind of dogged on him just a little bit, and Mr. Rogers really is, in my estimation, the king of kindness, because he follows this definition that we're talking about. And I'm not talking about puppets and cardigans and songs. I mean, that's great and lovely that he did that. But he actually understood at different points of his show that he had a position of authority and he would use it in a powerful way. One of my favorite examples comes from 1969. It was a time of intense racial tension in our world. Just a year earlier, before this episode that he's about to talk about aired, Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And at this time, even though segregation was no longer legal, it was happening everywhere, including in community pools in lots of neighborhoods throughout the United States, where black people were kept from swimming in the same pools as white people. And so understanding this cultural moment, Mr. Rogers did something that seemed simple, but was actually very intentional. The show had a black police officer, Officer Clemens. And so he invited Officer Clemens one day on one episode to cool his feet off in the pool with him. A powerful moment, even though it was simple, but showing that, hey, I have this position of influence. And I'm gonna make a statement and leverage it for the benefit of someone else to show kids that this is not okay, what's happening with so many of our neighbors throughout our nation. It's a powerful moment. And so that's 1969. You and I, we don't live at that point, but we have our own cultural moments as well. And when I look at this definition of kindness, this might just be me speaking, so I just want to acknowledge that for me, oftentimes I find in this that maintaining a soft heart is the hardest part. Like, I mean, it's great to do tender action, but sometimes I just find that there are so many forces and factors in our world that are kind of pushing at it. It just feels like, you know, if I live in this condition for too long, it's going to start to harden my heart in ways that I never expected. I've experienced this throughout my life, but one time that comes to mind was back when I was in college. I was at a point in my life where I knew I wanted to make a difference, but I wasn't sure how. And so I started thinking of different paths, and one of those paths that I considered was politics. And so there was a program at my university that would send students from school over to Washington, D.C. to do internships. And so I jumped at that opportunity, and I went on an internship. I interned for a congressman on Capitol Hill. And as I got there and I got off the plane and I got into the city, I quickly understood that Washington, D.C. is a city that is on constant battle mode. And it shows up in so many subtle ways that are like hard to explain, but here's one that just, you know, struck me as odd, even though in there it totally made sense. You know how most restaurants, you know, especially if they have like a bar area, they have TVs on with sports on it. In Washington, D.C., you know, you would go around and you see restaurants, and on their TVs, instead of it being sports, they would have CNN or Fox News, at least at that time. And depending on which side of the aisle somebody fell on was what would happen at that particular restaurant. And people, they would gather around it. It's like sports, but they would gather around the TV with their friends, and they would talk about like who had won the day and who had lost the day. It was very competitive and in very battle mode. And in a lot of ways, that city is in literal battle mode. To give context for when I was there at a time, this was right after 9/11 had happened. And some of you may remember this. There was an anthrax scare. Does anybody remember that? So the anthrax scare, you know, anthrax is like this powdery toxin. And so somebody somewhere, or a group of somebodies, I don't really remember who it was that was doing it, they would mail these letters to different people, many of them Congress people, and it was a threat, you know, to try to do harm. Funny enough, at that time, somebody in the congressional offices decided that it would be a great job for interns to open up mail. Now, when they did, you know, full disclosure, by the time I got, to there, they had known about this anthrax issue, and so they started irradiating the mail, you know, and sending it through, I don't know, whatever, lasers or something that would kill off the toxin, supposedly kill off the toxin. At least they told us that. But we would open up this mail. And I remember as we were kind of opening up the mail, and you're like, okay, hope there's nothing that'll puff out or anything like that. I also remember there was email, like we would get an email, and we got emails from the Capitol Police throughout this period of time. And the Capitol Police they would send an email. I remember the first time this happened. They would send an email. It was like kind of an all Capitol Hill email. And it would say that there was like a suspicious package that was found somewhere on Capitol Hill. And I remember the first time I saw it, I ran out of the office, like kind of like in a panic, to the front desk of our congressman's office. And they were all just going about it. And they kind of laughed at me like, yeah, we get about 3 of those every week. I was like, that's crazy. This is the environment that we live. And I could feel in my time there, my heart start to harden. And I think this happens when we maybe find ourselves constantly under siege, that it's so easy to see enemies everywhere. And you start to, categorize people or kind of label them or lump them into, this is what these people do or don't do. And it's just so easy to start dismissing people and making terrible assumptions, sometimes assumptions that just aren't true, but that's what happens in some of those environments. The thing is, I don't live in Washington, D.C. anymore, but those same forces and factors that were present there, they're present here too. Today, I live in Frisco, Texas, and I love our community. It's great, especially we've been there now for over 10 years, and I've loved to see the diversity of the community grow, especially in our elementary school. It's just been so great to see all these different people that my kids get to interact with. And so I was devastated a few weeks ago when there was a situation at our city council meeting where somebody, I think they were people that weren't from our city, but somebody came into the city and they started talking about how there was an Indian takeover in our city. And they used such angry rhetoric and hateful rhetoric that it made national news, it made international news. And I remember once I saw the article, it broke my heart because the day I read it, the day before, I was with an amazing Indian family that had invited our family. My boys are friends with this family's kid that's in elementary school. They had invited us into their son's birthday party, so generous and so kind and just amazing people. I mean, every time we see them, they come with a gift and they're amazing members of our community, of our neighborhood. And I just remember thinking when I read this, I was like, well, who wouldn't want them here? Like who wouldn't want this family that's so sweet and so kind? Like, why are we saying this about them? And I remember thinking, and again, this is different, I know. I'm from California originally, and so I remember I just tried to figure out, like, what would this feel like for me if somehow someone was like, there's a California takeover, and I've actually heard people say that there's a California takeover that's going on. The thing is, from California, I can hide that better than my friends from India. And so in that case, I was like, oh, what would it feel like if suddenly I knew everybody in my neighborhood, like you could walking up and down the streets and feeling like they're looking at like you, like, do they really want me here? Like, is this, like, are they making assumptions about me? And it just broke my heart. And I talked to some friends of mine who are Indian who go to our church, and they said the same thing, that they felt like there's never been a period of time where they felt less welcome, where people are making assumptions, and in their heart, they've been here for multiple decades, and recount the process of going through visa to citizenship, and all that they had to sacrifice to get here, only to feel right now that, man, all of a sudden I'm not wanted in this community. And that's the opposite of a soft heart. And the same thing is true even with some other cultural issues that we have going on as well. I sat down with our in Espanol campus pastor, Ram Vega. There's amazing things that are happening in that campus. If you aren't aware, we have a Spanish-speaking campus that meets here at the Legacy, in the Legacy Auditorium in Sunday afternoons. They have had record attendance, over 500 people that were here over Christmas. 17 countries are represented. And as you can imagine, there's a complex cultural moment that is happening right now with immigration, which is a hotly debated issue, an emotional one that, as a pastor, I am not an expert on how to solve any number of those issues. But I am called to have a soft heart. And really, all of us are called to have a soft heart as well. And so I want you to watch just a snippet of this conversation as he will help us have a window into some of the things that his campus is feeling right now.
Well, Ilram, it's great to talk with you as our in Espanol campus pastor. Amazing things that are happening in that community. And you are pastoring, we are both pastoring in a complex cultural moment, especially as we're talking about immigration. I mean, that is about as emotional as it gets. And our government, our law enforcement, dedicated men and women, they have a tough and complex job to do. And we love praying for them. We love asking for wisdom. We're called to support them and submit to them, and we certainly want to do that. But you and I are pastors, and you come at this with a pastor's hat on, and so do I. And so I would love to hear from you as you're pastoring your campus right now. If you could give us a window into what are people feeling right now? Like, what are some of the emotions that they're wrestling with? What are some of the complexities that they're dealing with that you're trying to help them as you pastor in that community?
Yes, probably the main situation right now is because the laws are changing. So since the laws are changing, now they don't know what's next. So we start with confusion, uncertainty. And then whenever something goes wrong, or maybe you don't get it right the first time because you were expecting certain things to happen that are not going to happen now because of the changes. Now you feel sadness. Sometimes you feel not just confusion, you feel afraid of even going outside. So it's a lot of fear, a lot of sadness, a lot of stress. People is getting actually sick because of all these changes. I just spoke yesterday to a member of the church. We were in a hospital visiting a friend, but he was there, and I know his situation, and I noticed he was kind of sad. I talked to him, how you feeling? And then he opens up and says, I'm so afraid. My next appointment is in mid-April, and I'm so afraid. I cannot sleep. I said, well, you need to relax, or otherwise you're going to get sick. I'm getting sick. So I was able to pray for him and acknowledge his fear, acknowledge his sadness, acknowledge his confusion, and bring it all to God. So that's what they are feeling. I don't have an answer for those legal situations, legal worries, but what we do have is, okay, let's acknowledge that and let's bring it to God. So that's what's going on right now in my campus.
And some of the confusion this helped me a bit, was around even some of the political asylum situations where people would come here under one status and it would change. Could you just give us a window into what that feels like, what's going on?
Well, let's say a quick explanation would be you have a political asylum case, and then it takes time to, let's say, to go to the next phase. But you have a protective status, so you keep continue with your case. Suddenly that status, which is called TPS, temporary protective status, gets removed, and now you have nothing to protect you to continue with your political asylum case. So that's what I'm talking about. People that is already has a case, is already been doing whatever they have been requested, has presented whatever proof they are being asked to, and suddenly they have no means to continue with that case. So that throws everything into confusion. So yes, they're trying to abide by the law, and now the law is not there any longer for them. So I'm not saying that it's right or wrong.
Yeah,
because
but
I don't know immigration law,
yeah.
but it's stressful,
Yeah.
fearful, and brings all kinds of feelings into the heart that now what's next?
Or families getting separated, or the idea that if somebody had their status revoked and they're going back to a country that they had fled,
Correct.
just safety issues that pop up with that too.
And you don't want to bring your children there. So all of this comes together. You fear for your children, then imagine how you're going to feel. You are getting deported, they're staying here, or they're going to be sent back probably to that country or to any other country, because now we don't know. So fear is a lot what I'm facing right now.
Again, we have a longer conversation that we posted online. But again, the point of this is there's so many complexities that I'm not trying to get into all of that. I'm trying to say our job is to be kind, to maintain a tender or a soft heart and have tender action for for the people that God has put into our path. And for better or for worse right now, the bar of being kind is actually pretty low. Like, it's great that what the Good Samaritan did, the extravagance that he goes to, that's great and that's wonderful. But honestly, as I've talked to many people in our community, and again, it's not just immigration thing. There's so many different instances in our culture right now, maybe even many of you that feel this way, that are feeling unwanted, unwelcomed, feel judged, or that assumptions are being made, that one of the best ways, even one of the simplest ways that you and I can have tender action is to simply just say, go up to people and ask them how they're doing. And to even go and just make it really clear that we are so glad you're here. We want you here. In fact, my hope and my prayer, and I believe this at Chase Oaks, it's what I love about our community here, but that this is a place that whatever your struggle, whatever your skin color, whatever your story, whatever your stance is on any number of issues, that you would feel, not just that you're, it's like, oh, it's nice that you're here, that you would feel welcomed here beyond any kind of approach, that we would just be so excited that you're here and that you would feel that warmth that would come here each time. And I tried to think of a way to do this without being manipulative, and I really can't think of it. And so I'm just going to ask, because I know there's some people in our audience even right now that are wondering if this is a place where they feel welcome, and that the best way that you and I can do that is through either an audible yes or a cheer or a clap or whatever it is. And so I'm going to ask a question in a second, and I would love for us to respond so that they would hear that this is indeed a place that we want to be welcoming and kind in a very unkind world. And so, Chase Oaks, can we commit to this being a place that is a kind place for everybody? Can we commit to that? I'm so proud. I mean, you guys make me proud every time, and I love that this is a place that does. Again, we've got all sorts of differences, and I love that we get to discuss those differences, but in a place of safety and a place of grace. And so as I close out today, I want to make this personal for each of us. And maybe you're like me, where maintaining a soft heart is difficult. That maybe there's a person or a group of people where you would say, you know what, I just struggle to have a soft heart with them. I just feel it being hard. And the good news is that God is in the heart change business. And so you can ask him to do that. Just say, hey, God, would you help me? Help me not make assumptions. Help me to be open to see these as people that you love, even with our differences. Or maybe soft heart's not as much of the issue. Maybe it's tender action. And that there's some way this week that you can leverage whatever power, whatever position, whatever you have to send a meal to someone, to open up your home, do whatever it is, a way to do a tender action, because that can make a world of difference. Because the good news is that you and I worship a God who is kind. That Jesus had a lot of splachna. He had it throughout the Gospels. And he had tons of tender action to the point of dying on a cross for you and I. So I'd love to close by praying our prayer, but I'm going to pray. We've been praying a prayer throughout this series. I would love to pray it as a benediction over us. So you don't have to repeat this out, but if you want, you can either sit there or just receive it. Sometimes it's helpful to open your hands or anything like this too, but I would love to pray this over you. And here we go. May the God of kindness, by the power of his Holy Spirit, fill you with his kindness, so that it will overflow out of you each day and every way in the week ahead. Amen. God bless.